So your first like encounter, like with psychedelics, either in a strong way or just?
Well, was a friend of mine when I graduated from high school, and they were building that band. So he insisted that we eventually smoke pot and take acid, and I had never encountered old lefties or acid heads or musicians or people who gave a shit about any of this stuff before. It was all new to me. I had just come from Colorado to the West Coast, so I was easily swept into all of this. And yeah, he and his friends were into who was that strange heroin-based comedian?
Lenny Bruce?
No, not Lenny Bruce. Stranger, more heroin-based. The guy who did the thing about Dinez. Lord Buckley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And they were into all of this stuff. And I had been studying the Evergreen Review for a couple of years, trying to figure out what was going on with the culture. But when I finally got to the scene and all this acid and all this left-wing politics and all that, then I understood. And
so anyway, he
basically turned me on. And
were you kind of fascinated from the get-go?
Well, I'd been worrying about mescaline since I'd read Doors of Perception 3 or 4 years before. And I'd also read Havelock Ellis's The Dance of Life, which has a long chapter on mescaline. Actually, that passage in Havelock Ellis, it's only a page or so, is one of the most seducing passages in all of psychedelic literature. He was taking peyote at the turn of the century. I mean, these are the people who really got into under the wire. People who took it 100 years ago. Can you imagine? That is hard to grab hold of.
But were you always sort of partly as much influenced by the kind of alchemical, mystical historical books you read in some way, as well as like the more primal, evolving?
Well, I was raised by Catholic rationalists, so it's hard to square that. In other words, you would run around spending part of your time trying to understand the nature of guardian angels, and the rest of the time grappling with fairly rational concepts. I mean, my family's basic orientation was mining, and not science in the sense of degreed science, but my father was an electrician, my uncles ran radio and television repair shops, and my father flew, navigated, did radio. So but I did spend a lot of time grappling with shit like the nature of the soul and the nature of sin and all of these imponderables, And of course what you end up doing is you end up reading scholars of mysticism. And then I would read about what John of the Cross or somebody else had got hold of, and then I would try for it. And I don't recall getting too far, but
when you were still
quite young,
right?
Yeah.
When you were still thinking in a Catholic mode.
Yeah, because it was all religious mysticism.
Right.
There was no other form of mysticism before Huxley published his books. I mean, it was somehow for Catholics, there was no other form of mysticism. There was Ouspensky-itis and Gurdjieffianism and all these peculiar... But none of that was quite kosher.
Did you have a break with Catholicism, or did it just mutate into all of your?
It sort of mutated. I read Jung, is what happened. I first read Psychology and Alchemy, and that led me on to the other one, which is deeper about all of that. It's something about the nature of the Christos and alchemy, and then I saw how these geographically defined religious impulses could be part of some broader, deeper thing. And alchemy, it was a revelation to me. All that. I didn't get religious history from the church the way I got it from Jung. Because from Jung I realized it was books. And so you could read these books. I mean, it was torturous. It was when I was first going to Cal. But on the other hand, I had a library card, and I could actually get at this stuff in whatever form it can never be gotten at. I mean, alchemy makes no sense at all if you actually read the literature.
Right. So when you decided to start speaking and doing these conferences and speaking on the radio, did you have a sense of a kind of mission?
Well, I always felt people should know about psychedelics, that was the untold story, that if there was anything new to be said or brought into the cultural dialogue, it was the news that these psychedelics were not these very tricky to manufacture drugs like LSD, but that it was really about plants. And I don't know if I would say I had a sense of mission. I certainly thought it was a fine idea that people realize. And I was also interested in feedback. It wasn't that I wanted to enlighten people. I wanted to hear what people had to say about this stuff, because to me it was all so confounding. The transformations of language, what it did to information. I mean, that's still what psychedelics are about. It's what it does to information.
We'll talk about that a little bit. How do you...
Well, it seems to show some kind of... how would you put it? Some kind of universality of source, or some language is not syntax, it's not grammar, it's none of these things. It's some kind of divine, you could almost call energy, which flows out of objects and situations. Everything wants to communicate. And so then what the chain of being is somehow handing connectivity on, to the next plant, animal, human being, work of art, whatever it is. And I still grapple with what all this means. And to me, it's the most psychedelic part of the psychedelic experience is when you get the logos coming out of the trees, the rocks, the berries, the water, everything. And it's the most Taoist part of it. It's where nature becomes transparent to its own intent to communicate or something like that.